This is Community Radio Networks. Today, ladies and gentlemen, is Thursday, the 30th of May, and we have all the information here for you to take on the day. We'll start with the world news. This is Community Radio Networks, the world news read by Shabnam Madgil. Israel's military has said it seized control of a strategic corridor along Gaza's border with Egypt to cut off smuggling tunnels as it tries to destroy the militant Hamas group in a war now in its 8th month. The capture of the Philadelphia corridor could complicate Israel's relations with Egypt, which has complained about Israel's advance towards its border. Israel says the corridor is awash in tunnels that have funneled weapons and other goods for Hamas, despite a years-long blockade imposed by Israel and Egypt. Rafah residents have reported intense artillery shelling and gunfire in Gaza's far southern city after Israel said it had seized the strategic corridor on the Palestinian territory's border with Egypt. Israel's military has taken control of the entire section of the Gaza Strip along the border with Egypt. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has urged the international community to ensure Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are not displaced with their besieged territory. Israel must do more to protect Palestinian civilians in Gaza and should remove all barriers to the flow of aid at scale through all crossings and routes into the enclave, said the United States to the UN Security Council yesterday. The continued pattern of significant civilian harm resulting from incidents like airstrikes undermines Israel's strategic goals in Gaza. And it is also the group of experts that have issued the call for decisive international action against expressing outrage at the Israeli attack that killed the 45 Palestinians sheltering in a makeshift tent camp in Rafah. Out of school and living in overcrowded shelters, children in Gaza face a heightened risk of violence, exploitation, and abuse. This, according to a warning by the International Rescue Committee. And Benny Gantz, a member of Israel's war cabinet, will likely announce his withdrawal from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government within a few days. Brazil withdrew its ambassador to Israel after months of tension between the two countries over the war in Gaza and latest repercussions from a South American nation over Israel's military campaign in the Palestinian territory. The move was announced in Brazil's official gazette. And Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez met Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa and leading officials from several Middle Eastern countries in Madrid after Spain, Ireland, and Norway recognized a Palestinian state. Clashes broke out between police and protesters outside the Israeli embassy in Mexico, rallying against the country's military offensive in the southern Gazan city of Rafah. And President Xi has said that China would continue to support alleviating the humanitarian crisis and post-conflict rebuilding in Gaza, pledging to provide another 500 million yuans, which is $69 million, in emergency humanitarian assistance. China wants to build up its relations with Arab states as a benchmark for maintaining world peace and stability, said President Xi Jinping in a speech that also addressed the Gaza crisis. And a string of security, logistical, and weather problems has battered the plan to deliver desperately needed humanitarian aid to Gaza through a U.S. military-built pier. Broken apart by strong winds and heavy seas just over a week after it became operational, the project faces criticism that it hasn't lived up to its initial billing or its $320 million price tag. The jury in Donald Trump's hush money trial ended its first day of deliberations without a verdict yesterday, but asked to rehear testimony from key witnesses about the alleged hush money scheme at the heart of the history-making case. The 12-person jury was sent home around 4 p.m. yesterday after about 4.5 hours of deliberations. The process resuming this morning when jurors are expected to rehear their requested testimony and at least part of the judge's legal instructions meant to guide them on the law. The judge overseeing the hush money case against Donald Trump has said no verdict was reached on day one of deliberations in the first criminal trial of a former U.S. president. Justice Samuel Alito is flatly rejecting calls to recuse himself in 2 cases before the Supreme Court involving former President Trump because of 2 flags that flew outside his homes. In letters yesterday to House and Senate Democrats, Alito said he had nothing to do with the flying of the flags and that nothing about the incidents merited recusal under the Supreme Court's Code of Conduct. President Biden signaled the start of a more aggressive campaign against Donald Trump as the former president's criminal trial nears an end, telling voters in Philadelphia that the threat he could pose in another term is even greater than the damage he did in his first term. During a rare joint campaign appearance with Vice President Kamala Harris, he said his predecessor was running a campaign of lies, especially to black voters, by trying to make the country forget just how dark and unsettling things were when he was president. Gearing up for the 2024 election, the Biden-Harris campaign launched its Black Voters Initiative yesterday at Philadelphia's Girard College, a majority black boarding school. And it is Vice President Kamala Harris who will speak at the U.S. Air Force Academy graduation today in Colorado, her first address at the ceremony that launches cadets into the Air Force or Space Force with pomp and the roar of jets. Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has filed a complaint with the FCC over CNN's debate rules, claiming the network colluded with President Biden and former President Trump's campaigns to keep him off the first presidential debate slated for next month. His complaint filed yesterday alleges that CNN, along with Trump, Biden, and their campaigns collectively engaged in a flagrant violation of the Federal Election Campaign Act to not have the independent candidate on the network's June 27th debate. The White House plans to announce new measures to support the development of new U.S. nuclear power plants, a large potential source of carbon-free electricity that the government says is needed to combat climate change. Milwaukee getting ready for a massive influx of private jets at its Mitchell International Airport, as this July top Republicans will flock to the city for the Republican National Convention. The airport shared it's expecting to receive around 200 or more private aircrafts that will drop off convention attendees for the July 15th to 18th event. And among those expected to travel to Milwaukee for this 4-day event include the presumptive nominee, former President Trump. 3 incidents, including a stabbing in Ocean City, cast a shadow over an otherwise lovely Memorial Day weekend at the Jersey Shore. The Cape May County prosecutor says troublemakers are not welcome and will not be tolerated, while Seaside Heights Mayor Anthony Vaz blamed the lack of respect from young people for this trouble. Power outages scattered across storm-weary Texas, lingering into this morning. And the city of Dallas says crews have received more than 1,600 service requests for storm debris and blocked roads. Of course, people can call 311 to report those issues, but it will take time to clean up. 2 large areas of showers and isolated severe storms are moving towards North Texas this morning also. Louisville officials have dropped all charges against Scotty Scheffler stemming from a traffic incident outside Valhalla Golf Club on the 17th of this month, and the dismissal of charges brings to a close one of the strangest incidents in a bizarre era for men's golf. Scheffler, the world #1 player, was on his way to Valhalla for an early morning tee time in the second round of the PGA Championship when he was stopped by police just outside the club's gates. Traffic had been halted around the club because of a fatal traffic accident involving a pedestrian roughly an hour before, and the pre-dawn scene was a chaotic blur of rain and flashing lights. Players were permitted to enter the club, and Scheffler attempted to do so even after being stopped by an officer. Manhattan prosecutors told a judge they are evaluating more claims of sexual misconduct made against Harvey Weinstein and could potentially seek a new indictment against him before his scheduled retrial on rape and sexual assault charges. In a shocking incident yesterday, an unhinged driver attempted to mow down Orthodox students and a rabbi outside a Brooklyn Jewish school while allegedly shouting, "I'm gonna kill all the Jews." Video footage from the Flatbush Shomron Safety Patrol captures the driver revving his engine and mounting the curb as he swerved towards Orthodox Jews outside the yeshiva in Canarsie around 11:25 a.m. As per a New York Post report, the alleged attacker, identified as 58-year-old Asghar Ali, a Pakistani immigrant and cab driver with a history of mental illness, currently under investigation by the New York Police Department's Hate Crimes Task Force, and detectives interviewed him last night. He faces more than a dozen charges, including attempted murder, attempted assault, and hate crime charges. Police do not believe the attack is terror-related and have not found evidence linking him to radical groups online. New York will boost security for the upcoming T20 Cricket World Cup in June. after reports of threats, especially related to the India-Pakistan match. In preparation for the Cricket World Cup, the team has been working with federal and local law enforcement to keep attendees safe, according to Governor Kathy Hochul. And she said that no credible threat at this time has been reported. World Cup matches between India and Pakistan, which have not played a bilateral series in several years due to tense political relations, are among the most viewed sporting event in the world. The 9th T20 World Cup will run from June the 1st to 29th, with matches at 9 stadiums, 6 in the West Indies and 3 in the United States. And the India-Pakistan June 9th contest will take place at the Eisenhower Park Stadium in Nassau County in New York. The United States will boycott a UN tribute today to Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, who died earlier this month in a helicopter crash. The 193-member UN General Assembly traditionally meets to honor any sitting head of state at the time of their death, and the tribute will include speeches about Raisi. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is thanking college students in the U.S. for joining Tehran's resistance front against Israel and the U.S. with their protests over the mounting death toll in Gaza. And the registration period has begun for candidates hoping to run in Iran's presidential election in just over a month's time. To register their bids, they must appear in person at the Interior Ministry in the next 5 days. Mexico held the last day of campaigning yesterday before Sunday's nationwide election, but the closing rallies were darkened by attacks on candidates and the country's persistently high homicide rate. The first results have been announced from what is seen as South Africa's most closely fought election since the African National Congress came to power 30 years ago. With the results from around 20% voting districts counted so far, the ANC is leading with 44%, followed by the DA with 25%. South Africans voted yesterday at schools, community centers, and in large white tents set up in open fields in an election seen as their country's most important since apartheid ended 30 years ago. It could put the young democracy into unknown territory. South Africa's ruling African National Congress looks set to lose its parliamentary majority for the first time since coming to power after the end of apartheid 30 years ago. With just a week to go until the European Parliament elections, there are votes for the members of the European Parliament being cast from the 6th to the 9th of June across the European Union, but vary by country. The Dutch will kick things off on the 6th of June, and this will be followed by Ireland on the 7th, and then Latvia, Malta, and Slovakia the next day. The Czech Republic and Italy vote across 2 days, June 7th and 8th, and June 8th and 9th, respectively. There are 360 million eligible voters in the European Union. The minimum voting age varies, but for most European countries it is 18. And for the first time in Germany, minors are also allowed to vote, as the country's voting age for the European elections has been lowered from 18 to 16. Let Ukraine use Western weapons to strike targets inside Russia. That message, long a priority for Kyiv and its fiercest backers, is now being voiced by a growing number of Western leaders. The U.S. has so far remained unmoved by this pressure, putting it at odds with allies and the company of the Kremlin, which has warned against such a move. But there are signs that this could change. The debate inside the Biden administration over this issue is ongoing, and some top officials back lifting the restrictions on how Ukraine uses weapons provided by Washington. More NATO allies have approached measures to allow Ukraine to use these supplied weapons for attacks on military targets in Russia. And Russian leader Putin says European countries should rethink their call to let Ukraine use these Western arms to strike his country. President Zelensky said that Russia was still trying to disrupt next month's World Peace Summit devoted to the conflict with Russia, and was putting pressure on countries to stay away from the gathering. He wants the summit, scheduled for the 15th and 16th of June in Switzerland, to produce a front to exert pressure on Russia and advance his peace formula, which calls for the withdrawal of Russian troops and the restoration of Ukraine's 1991 borders. A Russian cargo ship will launch towards the International Space Station early this morning. The robotic Progress 88 freighter lifted off atop a Soyuz rocket from the Russian-run Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Britain's first black woman lawmaker, Diane Abbott, said she was dismayed the opposition Labour Party looked set to bar her as an election candidate over comments she made over a year ago about Jews and racism. The 70-year-old Diane Abbott is Britain's longest-serving black member of Parliament. Princess Kate Middleton made a rare statement alongside her husband, Prince William, amid her time away from the public eye due to her cancer battle. The Princess and the Prince of Wales released a statement via X following the news that Royal Air Force pilot Mark Long died in a Spitfire crash that happened during a Battle of Britain event where the pilot was maneuvering a World War II-era plane. Incredibly sad to hear of the news this afternoon from the Royal Air Force, Coningsby, said Kate and William in their verified account. And our thoughts this evening are with the pilot's loved ones, the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, and the wider RAF family. The Spanish parliament passed a controversial amnesty for Catalan separatists after months of political wrangling in Madrid. And the Swedish police said they were investigating a hate crime after an unidentified person dumped a dead boar outside a mosque in southern Sweden overnight. And police wrote on their website that the mosque had a pig thrown at its facade. A tragic incident at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport, witnesses reporting hearing a hellish noise as a person was sucked into the jet turbine of a KLM plane and killed. The horrifying event occurred on the runway as the KLM City Hopper Embraer E190 was being prepared for departure to Denmark. And the remains of Ferdinand Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, the first king of Bulgaria following 5 centuries of Ottoman rule, were repatriated from Germany to be interred in a family mausoleum 76 years after his death. And the coffin bearing his remains was transported back to Bulgaria from the German town of Coburg on a military plane. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Community Radio Networks. It was a message delivered in blunt terms. Democracy is messy. Democracy can be hard, but it is far better to have a messy democracy than to be controlled by an authoritarian, said Senator Tammy Duckworth during a 2-day visit to Taiwan. She and 3 other U.S. senators arrived on the Beijing-claimed island in the midst of domestic political turmoil, as the executive cabinet said it would reject parliamentary reforms passed by the opposition-controlled legislature that are seen as favoring China. China is developing new systems to hunt the U.S. nuclear-powered submarines that could threaten a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has said new rules outlined by China's Coast Guard that could result in the detention of foreigners in the South China Sea were an escalation and worrisome. China Coast Guard ships have been in waters around Japanese-controlled islands in the East China Sea for a record 158 consecutive days, according to Tokyo's latest count release, surpassing the previous record set in 2021. The world's first wooden satellite has been built by Japanese researchers who said their tiny cuboid craft will be blasted off on a SpaceX rocket in September. North Korea floated balloons carrying garbage and feces into South Korea last week. According to officials in Seoul, the obnoxious floating orbs were an apparent retaliation against South Korean activists who'd flown anti-Pyongyang leaflets and USB drives containing K-pop music over the border. Nigeria adopted a new national anthem after the lawmakers passed a law that replaced the current one with a version dropped nearly a half a century ago, sparking widespread criticism about how the law has hastily passed without much public input. President Bola Tinubu's assent to the law comes a day after it was approved by both chambers of Nigeria's National Assembly, which is dominated by the governing party. The body of a Kenyan climber who died on Mount Everest last week will remain on the mountain where he died, said his family. Joshua Kirui died while on a daring mission to reach the summit of Mount Everest without supplementary oxygen. The 40-year-old mountaineer fell into a crevice after about 48 meters there below the 8,849-meter peak, along with his Nepali guide. His family said retrieving his body from such a high altitude would be too risky for the rescue team. Climbing Everest, the world's highest peak, is considered extremely difficult and risky even for experienced climbers. He was trying to become the first African to climb Mount Everest without extra oxygen, accompanied by his Nepali climber Nawang Sherpa, who is still missing. And Nepal's Dipendra Singh Airy is a 24-year-old policeman dubbed the Tiger, who hopes to use his record-breaking batting skills to boost his nation at the T20 World Cup. Last September, Nepal's victory by a staggering 273 runs against Mongolia was the biggest margin by runs in all T20s, but Airy's astonishing part in that win included the fastest T20 50 in just 9 balls. The rising star smashed sixes from each of the first 6 balls he faced before completing his quick-fire half-century to beat the previous record of 12 balls. Nepal heading to the 20-nation World Cup, sitting a lowly 17th in the ICC rankings, but Nepal's chief selector said Airy could make all the difference. The ICC Men's T20 World Cup 2024 begins in the US and the West Indies this Sunday, and for the first time the tournament will have as many as 20 teams participating. England are the defending champions, while India and Australia are among the top favourites to lift the trophy on the 29th of June in Barbados. An estimated 60% of Kampala's population lives in slums, and fast bowler Juma Miyagi is a cult figure in these impoverished areas, and these usually football-loving communities are keenly following Miyagi and the Ugandan cricket team's debut at the ICC T20 World Cup. And Miyagi, who grew up in the slums of Naguru on the outskirts of Kampala, will lead the senior team's bowling attack at the ICC showpiece that is starting this weekend. The Indian women's national hockey team received a warm welcome from the High Commission of India, where dignitaries praised the players for their achievements and their perseverance in overcoming obstacles. The team, along with senior Indian men's squad, is currently in the United Kingdom for the FIH Pro League fixtures, which began this weekend. And after the UK, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak decided to backtrack on the plan to scrap the post-study work visa for international students last week. Lord Karan Bilamoria, Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, has advised students from India to go ahead and opt for the UK for higher education. Indian chess prodigy R. Pragananda achieved a significant victory by defeating world number 1 Magnus Carlsen in a classical game format. This match, which took place during the 3rd round of the tournament, marked Pragananda's first classical win against Carlsen. At just 18 years of age, he displayed his mettle on Carlsen's home ground, leading the open section of the 6-player tournament after this victory. The Indian Air Force personnel touched down at the U.S. Air Force's Alson Air Force Base in Alaska today to participate in Red Flag 24, a multinational air combat exercise. It is an advanced training program that spans over a period of 2 weeks, focusing on honing the skills and tactics required in aerial combat scenarios. The Ministry of External Affairs said that no formal proposal for a bilateral free trade agreement with the Maldives has been made by the government of India, and this follows remarks by Maldives minister who said that India has shown interest in creating an FTA with the Maldives. Prime Minister Modi is set to embark on a nearly 2-day meditation exercise at the renowned Vivekananda Rock Memorial in Kanyakumari today. Before his sojourn, he addressed a public rally in Punjab's Hoshiarpur and gave a special message to Kashi voters before the Lok Sabha campaign ends and asked them to go out and vote in large numbers. Kanyakumari has been placed under tight security measures in light of this high-profile event. The necessary arrangements, including heavy security, have been made for Modi's 45-hour stay at the Mid-Sea Memorial, which was built in honor of the revered Hindu saint Swami Vivekananda. According to BJP leaders, he will meditate at the Rock Memorial following the conclusion of the Lok Sabha polls campaign later today. And Prime Minister Modi appealed to voters of Varanasi, especially the youth, women and farmers, to come out and vote in large numbers, and said the people of Kashi have to set a new record this time. Odisha's Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik expressed strong confidence in his party's prospects for the assembly election in the state and the Lok Sabha elections, stating that the BJD will form a solid government again in the state. Upping the ante against Prime Minister Modi, Congress Chief Mallikarjun Kharge today accused the leader of using divisive language during the Lok Sabha election campaign and alleged that Prime Minister Modi mentioned Mandir Masjid and other divisive topics 421 times during his election campaign, despite the Election Commission's guidelines prohibiting appeals for votes based on caste and religion. Former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh today appealed to Punjab voters 2 days ahead of their vote to protect democracy and constitution from repeated assaults by the BJP, calling the people of Punjab warriors. And the Congress leader said that BJP has been targeting Punjab, Punjabis and Punjabiyat over the withdrawal of the 3 farm laws. Ahead of the last phase of the ongoing Lok Sabha elections this Saturday, the Samyukt Kisan Morcha appealed to people to ensure change of government for change in policies. The 7-phase voting for the 2024 Lok Sabha elections, which started on the 19th of April, will conclude this Saturday, and the results for the elections, which spanned for almost 2 months, will be declared on the 4th of June for all the states and union territories. This season, amid record temperatures, the weather station at Safdarjung, Delhi's base station, recorded 4 days with temperatures exceeding 45 degrees Celsius. However, on the western fringes of Delhi, in Najafgarh and Jafarpur, among others, they have logged 9 such days so far. Not just the northern plains and central India, the Himalayan states such as Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir are also experiencing record-breaking temperatures this month. And a court today sentenced senior Samajwadi Party leader Azam Khan to 10 years of imprisonment in connection with the 2016 case related to forced eviction, looting, and intimidation of inhabitants of Rampur's Dungarpur colony during the Samajwadi Party government's regime out there. A case of attempted murder and dacoity has been registered against 16 army personnel, including 3 lieutenant colonels, by Jammu and Kashmir police for their alleged involvement in a violent attack on the Kupwara police station. The incident, which happened on the intervening night of Tuesday and Wednesday this week, is said to be triggered by the questioning of a territorial army Jawan by the Jammu and Kashmir police in connection with an alleged drug case. And the Ministry of External Affairs today responded to former Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's admission that Islamabad violated the 1999 Lahore Declaration signed between the 2 countries. During its weekly press briefing, the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Randhir Jaiswal said, "You are aware of our position on the issue. It is true that even in Pakistan, now a perspective based on reality is coming to the fore." India's comment came a day after Nawaz Sharif said that Pakistan violated the agreement signed between him and his Indian counterpart Atal Bihari Vajpayee in 1999, which was followed by the Kargil War. Pakistan defeated Australia 3-0 on the second match of the series to win the Sarsabz volleyball series at the Liaquat Gymnasium of the Pakistan Sports Complex in Islamabad yesterday. And Nat Skyver Brunt smashed an unbeaten century as England women secured a resounding 178-run victory against Pakistan in the third and final one-day international to seal the series 2-0 at the county ground in Chelmsford. And the grand unveiling of the Pakistan Football League on the 4th of June has received an added kick to it as Spanish giants Club Atletico de Madrid have been invited to attend its launch. The club's first foray into Pakistani territory came from 2016 to 20 when it launched its International Academy project in Lahore as part of its international expansion plan. And the members of the Academy touring Pakistan from the 3rd to the 5th of June, beginning in Islamabad and culminating in Karachi. 4 Pakistani nationals were killed and 2 others injured in firing by Iranian forces along the border in Washuk district of Balochistan. And blaming a small group of criminal elements behind violent clashes that left some Pakistani students injured in Bishkek, the ambassador of Kyrgyzstan in Islamabad said that the chief and 9 officers of the Internal Affairs Directorate of the region were removed from their positions after these riots on the night of the 18th of this month. Why were 3 Bahria town officials offloaded from a Saudi Arabia-bound flight? A question that the Islamabad High Court has placed before the government in a case that is expected to be taken up for hearing today. And former Premier Imran Khan today, in his first courtroom interaction with Chief Justice of Pakistan Qazi Faiz Isa, complained of difficulties in seeking legal assistance for a case about changes to accountability laws. He is currently incarcerated at the Adiala jail and said, "They do not let me meet my legal team. I'm being kept in solitary confinement here. I neither have any material nor a library to prepare for the case." And the last hearing had turned out anticlimactic as ex-Premier Imran Khan had appeared via video link but did not get a chance to speak as a petitioner in the matter. Taking a cue from former President Donald Trump, the former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan today claimed that the February national election was rigged, calling it the biggest robbery on public mandate. He was speaking to the Supreme Court via this video link from the Adiala jail in Rawalpindi, where he is being held in solitary confinement. PTI founder Imran Khan has said that his only regret from his time in power was trusting former Army Chief General retired Qamar Javed Bajwa, whom he held responsible for creating lies and false narratives allegedly to secure a second extension as the military head. An Islamabad District and Sessions Court did not announce its already reserved verdict in the Iddat case against former Premier Imran Khan and his spouse Bushra Bibi, while the complainant was assaulted outside the court. Advisor to the National Command Authority, Lieutenant General Khalid Ahmed Kidwai, has underscored Pakistan's stance on not committing to the no first use policy regarding nuclear weapons. Speaking at a seminar held at the Center for International Strategic Studies to commemorate Yom-e-Takbir, the anniversary of the 1998 nuclear test, General Kidwai, who has served as the Director General of Strategic Plans Division, said Pakistan does not have a no first use policy, and I'll repeat that for emphasis. The top brass of Pakistan's military has vowed to comprehensively defeat the threat of what it termed digital terrorism, which aims to induce despondency in the Pakistani nation and sow discord among national institutions. According to this press release from the Inter-Services Public Relations, the consensus was reached during the 83rd Formation Commanders Conference at the General Headquarters. And the Council of Islamic Ideology condemned the culture of mob vigilantism in the country and reiterated its call for the establishment of special courts to try such cases. A team of the National Accountability Bureau, accompanied by Rawalpindi police, raided the offices of Baria town, and no official word as some officials, Accountability Bureau confirmed the development on a condition of anonymity. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have in the world news for you today, but we will have the financial news coming up for you in just a minute. All right, let's get you all the financial news that you need to know today. It is World No Tobacco Day today, and today is the 30th of May. Wishing you all a lovely Thursday. World No Tobacco Day. Unexpected ways that smoking is harming your body apart from your lungs. It is very well known that the abuse of tobacco is associated with disastrous consequences. These are not confined to lungs alone and include almost every part of the body, ranging from various benign conditions to cancers. The primary constituent of tobacco is nicotine, which has deleterious effects through various nitrosamines that have direct as well as indirect impact. Consumption of tobacco may be in smoked or smokeless forms, and the former is common, but the latter is commoner in India in the form of pan masala or other such products. Both are associated with a higher incidence of oral cancers, and the use of quid is commonly observed to be associated with lateral sulcus cancer, or what is commonly known as Indian oral cancer. And the famous proverb, fire at one end and fool at the other, as it is observed with smoking, causes various additional cancers of the aerodigestive tract, including the laryngeal cancer or the voice box cancer, with associated morbidity of loss of speech. So, ladies and gentlemen, thought we'd mention this today on World No Tobacco Day today. The U.S. stocks headed for more losses today as lingering concerns about higher for longer interest rates and a Salesforce sell-off put a damper on investor spirits. Dow Jones Industrial Average Future sank 0.9% after shedding over 400 points to lead yesterday's stock market slide. S&P 500 futures have fallen 0.4%, while contracts on the tech-heavy Nasdaq 100 were down roughly 0.3%. U.S. stocks poised to extend their retreat as Treasury yields near the highest level this year fanned concern about restrictive monetary policy. ConocoPhillips is buying Marathon Oil in an all-stock deal valued at approximately $17.1 billion as energy prices rise and big oil companies reap massive profits. The deal is valued at $22.5 billion when including $5.4 billion in debt. Salesforce Inc. shares fell as much as 17% in pre-market trading today after the software maker said sales growth in the current quarter will stall to its slowest in history, fueling concerns about the company's ability to stay relevant as the industry shifts towards artificial intelligence tools. NVIDIA's highly anticipated earnings release delivered. The company's financial metrics blew past Wall Street's expectations, sending shares soaring nearly 20% in the 3 days after its earnings release. A wave of retail earnings before the bell today gave other clues to consumer resilience and economic health. Kohl's shares cratered after the department store chain surprised quarterly loss and cut to its annual sales forecast. Meanwhile, Best Buy posted a bigger drop in comparable sales than expected as Americans get choosy about spending on non-essentials. Best Buy reported another quarterly drop in sales as the nation's largest consumer electronics chain wrestles with cautious spending by Americans as they prioritize essential purchases and pay more for things like rent. Best Buy continues to struggle with these sluggish sales as consumer demand fizzles after a spike during the pandemic. Department store chain Kohl's cut its annual sales and profit forecast after posting a surprisingly quarterly loss on weaker consumer demand for its apparel and footwear, dragging its shares down 22% before the bell this morning. Pet owners must be more bullish than ever on taking proper care of their four-legged family members, as represented in Chewy's latest earnings beat. Shares of the online pet retailer are surging by over 25% as the company reports that first quarter auto-ship sales, its automated or pre-scheduled deliveries of pet foods and products, grew by 6.4% year over year. Investors are rewarding Foot Locker for taking a step in the right direction. Today, before the market opened, shares jumped more than 14% as CEO Mary Dillon called first quarter a solid start to the year. Its efforts to improve its digital business, the store experience, and loyalty and brand building seem to be showing early signs of promise. Activist investor Nelson Peltz has sold his entire Disney stake. He sold his position at a price of around $120 a share, which yielded a return of about $1 billion. Automakers have focused on producing cheaper cars and EVs in recent months as high prices remain a barrier to entry for many consumers. And several companies, including Ford Motor Company, Tesla, and Volkswagen, aim to put out EVs that cost less than $30,000 over the next few years. In the U.S. last month, the average selling price of a new EV was $55,242. And as Chinese automakers continue to flood the European markets and inch towards a U.S. launch, Western car makers have put more emphasis on less expensive EVs. BYD, China's biggest EV maker, is planning to build a factory in Mexico and currently sells cars for as low as $10,000. Stellantis plans to sell a $25,000 fully electric Jeep in the United States very soon. OpenAI announced licensing agreements with The Atlantic and Vox yesterday, allowing the company behind ChatGPT to train future AI models on their content. And the two are the latest in a string of news media companies that have secured licensing deals with OpenAI. Apple has made a deal with OpenAI, an artificial intelligence company run by Sam Altman, to put its ChatGPT technology into the new iOS 18 operating system for iPhones. The two are expected to make things public at the WWDC, but getting to this partnership wasn't easy for either Apple or OpenAI. Alphabet's Google and augmented reality startup Magic Leap are forming a strategic technology partnership and working on building immersive experiences that blend the physical and digital worlds. Magic Leap said in a blog post today that the two companies have agreed to a partnership, and a Google spokesperson confirming the agreement. Sometimes even iconoclasts have to play nice to rally support for his $56 billion pay package, which a court recently struck down. Tesla CEO Elon Musk is offering a group of shareholders an intimate tour of Tesla's Gigafactory. The bit of political glad handling comes before a pivotal vote and annual meeting on the 13th of June that will be seen as a referendum on his leadership. But the play for ballots highlights a key tension on the ongoing drama surrounding Musk and Tesla. Musk has threatened to pull major AI initiatives outside the company if he doesn't get enough voting power to steer companies' decisions. But since the threat earlier this year, he has gone all in on Tesla's AI strategy, centering self-driving technology as the key to Tesla's growth and identity. Last summer, the FTC filed a complaint against Amazon.com Inc. for an alleged years-long effort to enroll consumers into its Prime program without their consent. And this week, a judge rejected Amazon's request for the suit to be dismissed. One evening in March at 8:41 p.m., Chicago time to be exact, internal warnings flashed within Walmart Inc. about a curious thing happening at hundreds of its stores across the U.S. Shoppers scanning certain items at self-checkout stands were seeing the wrong prices. Some prices were lower than listed and others were higher, unbeknownst to those buying food, clothes, appliances, and everything in between. On that 19th of March, Walmart had suffered an internal system failure that stopped price data from flowing to the self-checkout stands. According to these documents, showing 1,600 stores were affected, resulting in widespread mispricing that has never before been reported. 2 days after the incident began, technology staff at America's largest retailer were still trying to fix the issue. Large U.S. banks may be more exposed to commercial property than regulators appreciate because of credit lines and term loans they provide to real estate investment trusts. Big banks' exposure to CRE lending grows by about 40% when that indirect lending to REITs is added. According to researchers, including Viral Acharya, professor of economics at the New York University. Billionaires from coast to coast are putting their influence and money behind Donald Trump, a wave of support that is helping the former president narrow his fundraising gap with President Biden and seize new momentum in his race for the White House. Some have already donated millions to his campaign, some have announced plans to do so, and some are only saying for now that they will vote for him. And he, meanwhile, is returning the favor, reportedly promising to make policy changes that would help their businesses and perhaps even rely on them as advisors if he returns to the White House. The Guinness World Record holder for being the longest-serving flight attendant, Betty Nash, has died at the age of 88, according to a statement from American Airlines. We mourn the passing of Betty Nash, who spent nearly 7 decades warmly caring for our customers in the air. She started in 1957 and held the Guinness World Record for the longest-serving flight attendant, inspired generations of flight attendants. Fly high, Betty. Her career as a flight attendant with Eastern Airlines in Washington, D.C. began in 1957, and she then went on to work for American Airlines, where she celebrated 60 years of service in 2017. Major League Baseball officially updated its statistics leaderboard yesterday to include 2,300 qualifying men who played in the Negro Leagues between 1920 and 1948. The integration incorporates findings from a 3-year research process initiated after MLB first recognized the Negro Leagues as major leagues in December of 2020. The next time you're looking to relax, you might want to grab a pair of binoculars and head outside to join in one of the fastest growing hobbies, birding. More than 96 million people in the U.S. have taken part in bird watching or bird conservation activities. That's more than 35% of the nation's population aged 16 and over, and more than double the number from the previous survey in 2016. Lab-grown meat is not currently available in any U.S. grocery store or restaurant. If some lawmakers have their way, it never will be. Earlier this month, both Florida and Arizona banned the sale of cultivated meat and seafood, which is grown from animal cells. In Iowa, the governor signed a bill prohibiting schools from buying lab-grown meat, and federal lawmakers are also looking to restrict it. Unclear how far these efforts will go. Some cultivated meat companies say they're considering legal action, and some states like Tennessee shelved the proposed bans after lawmakers argued they would restrict consumers' choices. Since the early days of aviation, pilots have been using aircrafts as flying billboards, and now one company is aiming to change airbound advertising with drones. According to Sustainable Skylines, Axios will soon send aerial advertisements over beaches in Miami, Florida, and from there the drones could also be coming to the Los Angeles area. So these drones are going to start flying ads over the beaches. The company plans to launch 2 drones in Miami and then plans to expand in Fort Lauderdale and Tampa by the end of the year. And on the company website, Sustainable Skylines lists several other cities as target locations. Los Angeles is the largest, and the list also includes Las Vegas, Daytona, Austin, and San Diego. Visiting a safari would be a pretty wild experience. How would you feel about owning one? The Franklin Drive-Through Safari in Robertson County, Texas could be yours. The property includes an extraordinary variety of different species, was recently put on the market. It is an extremely rare and unique opportunity to own an established and profitable drive-through safari and wildlife park that has been in business for over 10 plus years. The property is as turnkey as they come, with highway frontage, ample guest accommodations, all improvements already in place, and numerous native and exotic species. The Safari and Wildlife Park also includes a 5,000 square foot main home that has 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, 2 living room areas, and an office, a large game room with a pool and a bar. And the in-ground pool has a hot tub, a slide, a grotto, and a cabana area with an outdoor kitchen. That is a drive-through safari for sale in Central Texas. Buc-ee's is bigger and better than ever. It was always a shame that the world's largest Buc-ee resided outside the state of Texas in Tennessee. Come next month, that'll no longer be the case. In fact, the world's largest Buc-ee's will be located where everything started, right here in Texas. According to this press release, Buc-ee's will open the doors to its newest travel center in Luling, Texas, where the first ever Buc-ee's opened in 2003. And this Buc-ee's will occupy more than 75,000 square feet and offer 120 fueling stations, making it the largest Buc-ee's in the world. And the doors will open to the public at 6 a.m. on the 10th of June with the ribbon-cutting ceremony following at noon. The next few days will be a time for the arborists to shine, as storm damage is creating business for tree trimmers. After our storms, companies that cut down or cut up fallen trees are in demand across North Texas. Some homeowners wonder whether that big tree in their yard has just suffered a crack that could lead to it falling on top of someone. And for those cleaning up following the weather this week, don't forget to look in your fridge. When in doubt, throw it out. That's what the USDA wants you to do with all of the food in the fridge if you lost power. Most foods will keep up to 4 hours during a power outage. That's if you keep the door closed as much as possible. Items you should toss include meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and leftovers. Never taste test food because it could make you sick. You can hang on to the processed and hard cheeses, butter and margarine, as well as dried and uncut fresh fruit and uncut veggies. Milk, yogurt, and baby formula need to be thrown out. A full freezer can keep food safe for approximately 48 hours, while just 24 hours if it is half full and the door remains closed. Foods may be safely refrozen if it still contains ice crystals or is at 40 degrees. An artillery plant has opened in Mesquite that will produce 155 millimeter shells for the U.S. military. General Dynamics operates this plant on 250,000 square feet near 635 and Highway 80, and the shells will be produced in Mesquite and then assembled and loaded at General Dynamics plants in Iowa and Arkansas. The Texas Supreme Court has decided a Franklin County woman whose car was damaged in Dallas cannot file a class action suit against an insurance company. Sonny Litote's restored vintage 1983 Mercedes was involved in an accident in 2009. USAA sent her a check for $2,738, then reported the car as salvage. She said her car was worth much more and sent the check back. But a lawyer told the Texas Supreme Court that's not how the Texas law works. The statute makes it absolutely clear now that the owner of an owner-retained salvage vehicle cannot drive the car. If you ever go to AT&T Stadium for a Cowboys game, you know just what an experience it can be. Whether or not you are a Cowboys fan, that experience can either be amazing or heartbreaking. But that's besides the point. A recent study sought to find the safest stadiums to enjoy a game in the NFL, and AT&T Stadium found itself pretty high on that list. AT&T Stadium ranked as the 6th safest stadium in the NFL. Irish actor Nicola Coughlan, who plays Penelope Featherington in the hit Netflix series Bridgerton, has raised $1.2 million for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund through her social media and declared her support for Palestine time and again. American rapper Macklemore's new song, Hind's Hall, has soared across various Billboard charts, making it one of the biggest hits of all time. And the song has only established his stronghold in the music industry, but also elevated him as one of the most revolutionary artists of our time, especially when celebrated artists like Taylor Swift and Drake are being called out for repeatedly ignoring Israel's massacre of Palestinians. Hind's Hall has reached high rankings on 3 major Billboard charts, marking a significant win for the Grammy Award-winning artist. Saudi Arabia is preparing to formally launch a secondary offering of shares in oil giant Aramco as soon as this Sunday, a deal that could raise more than $10 billion and rank among the largest of its kind in recent years. The government plans to run a book-building process to take orders until next Thursday, and the deal has attracted informal interest from investors across the Mideast and Europe, totaling over $10 billion. China is on a drive to expand the use of the yuan internationally, but a researcher says Beijing's near-term intent is more about protecting against sanctions than currency dominance. An international law enforcement team has made a significant breakthrough in the fight against cybercrime, arresting a Chinese national and dismantling a massive botnet that has been operational for nearly a decade. The botnet, known as 911S5, was responsible for various illegal activities, including identity theft, child exploitation, and financial fraud. Tata Steel will infuse $2.1 billion in its Singapore arm to repay debt of its offshore entities and to support the restructuring costs of its loss-making UK operations. Further, it will convert debt instruments worth $565 million it holds in the Singapore arm into equity shares. Global ratings agency S&P revised India's outlook to positive from stable, citing robust growth and improvement in the quality of government spending, but kept the sovereign rating at the lowest investment grade of BBB minus. BSE Sensex and Nifty 50, the Indian equity benchmark indices, tanked in trade today, while BSE Sensex is down over 650 points. Nifty 50 went below 22,500. The Reserve Bank of India's annual report released today revealed that unclaimed deposits in banks have surged by 26% year on year. The Reserve Bank of India imposed a fine of 36.4 lakh rupees on foreign lender HSBC for Foreign Exchange Management Act violations. And the bourses warned investors to not fall for social media posts offering high returns through specialized apps that use names of established brokers and other intermediaries. In September of 2018, a meeting with Prime Minister Modi marked a pivotal moment for Sunil Bharati Mittal-led Bharati Airtel, which was grappling with a severe crisis at that time. Airtel was struggling due to the impact of free voice and data services provided by new entrant Reliance Jio and a series of decisions by the telecom regulator that negatively affected the incumbent market leader. The Enforcement Directorate has attached assets worth 290 crore rupees belonging to International Amusement Limited, a company providing amusement and recreation services as part of a money laundering investigation. The attached properties include unsold commercial space at the Great India Place Mall in Noida, commercial space in Rohini held by Adventure Island Limited, and leasehold rights over land in Jaipur under the name of International Amusement and Infrastructure Limited. In a rare move, the government has asked the board of IL&FS in New Delhi and two of its arms to recover excess money of 150 crore rupees, including managerial remuneration and commissions, from ex-directors after the entities restated their accounts to show losses of 9,600 crore rupees for financial years 2013 to 2018 instead of a profit of 1,869 crore rupees estimated by the management and board, which had to be superseded following massive irregularities. Insurance regulator IRDAI has brought in several reforms in the health covers aimed at improving service standards for policyholders. And after 4 unsuccessful attempts, Agni Kul Cosmos, a startup incubated at the IIT in Madras, this morning achieved a historic milestone when it launched the world's first single-piece 3D printed rocket engine designed and built indigenously in the country. With assistance from ISRO, the startup successfully carried out a suborbital test flight of its home-built rocket Agniban at 7:15 a.m. this morning from Sriharikota. The Asian Development Bank has announced a $180 million project to restore forest drains and roads in the coastal areas of Sindh. In this news out of Karachi, the ruling PMLN held a special meeting at the Sharif's estate to review budget preparations for the upcoming fiscal year, where it decided to prepare the financial plan in line with demands of the International Monetary Fund and also discussed proposals for drastic cuts in government expenditure. Attributing easing of inflationary pressures to robust agriculture output, lower fuel prices, and high base effect of last year, the government promised strong commitment ahead of the next year's budget. The National E-Commerce Council decided to develop a 5-year roadmap and action plan to promote digital trade. And the government in Islamabad contemplating launching 5G services could be further delayed by more than a year due to prolonged court cases, and the spectrum auction has already been pending for several years for the same reason. Shares of the Pakistan Stock Exchange gained more than 180 points in intraday trade today. And ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have in the financial news for you today, but I do have the final segment of our program for today coming up in just a minute.
नमस्कार मैं
This is the final segment of our program today. And today, ladies and gentlemen, is a Thursday, and it is the 30th of May. Two large areas of showers and isolated severe storms are moving towards North Texas. This morning, the first cluster approaching Wichita Falls, and the second cluster was in the Texas Panhandle, and both will merge together and drift across the area through the afternoon, and some of these storms may become severe. There's also that risk of flash flooding, but the tornado threat and the large hail threats are very low. By this evening, most areas will have picked up at least an inch or two of rain, and afternoon highs will reach the low 80s. And then another cluster of storms forms in West Texas, and more storms are possible late night today through early tomorrow morning. And this morning and afternoon event may stabilize the atmosphere slightly and allow the overnight complex to weaken as it approaches North Texas after midnight. If it stays strong, damaging winds, small hail and flooding will be in the threats, and lows will dip in the mid to upper 60s. And then more storms are possible tomorrow afternoon and evening, with the heaviest rain southeast of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and afternoon highs will struggle to hit 80 degrees. And then we do have more waves of heavy rain, some of which may become severe over the weekend. It's hard to pinpoint the exact coverage area right now, severe risk and the rainfall totals. There are lots of variables that are in play. Afternoon highs in the mid-80s this weekend, and we will keep you updated right here on Community Radio Networks. Let's tell you some stories from the annals of history that happened on today's date, the 30th of May. It was way back in 1431 at Rouen in English-controlled Normandy. The Joan of Arc, the peasant girl who became the savior of France, is burned at the stake for heresy. And her village lay on the frontier between the France of the Dauphin and that of Anglo-Burgundians. In the midst of this unstable environment, she began hearing voices of three Christian saints, Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. And when she was about 16, these voices exhorted her to aid the Dauphin in capturing Reims and therefore the French throne. She traveled and disbelieving this young peasant girl, she was sent home and dressed in men's clothes later, and accompanied by 6 soldiers, she reached the Dauphin's castle in 1429 and was granted an audience. And that was how she came to be known as Joan of Arc, who burned at the stake of heresy on the 30th of May in 1431. 1831. The King and Joan attacked Paris, and during the battle, she carried her standard up to the earthworks and called on the Parisians to surrender the city to the King of France. She was wounded but continued to rally the king's troops until Charles ordered an end to the unsuccessful siege. And that year, she led several more small campaigns, capturing the town of Saint-Pierre-le-Moitié. And in December, Charles ennobled Joan, her parents, and her brothers. Playwright Christopher Marlowe was 29 years old, was killed in a brawl over a bar tab on this day, and that happened in the year 1593. Born 2 months before William Shakespeare, he was the son of a Canterbury shoemaker. A bright student, won scholarships to prestigious schools, and earned his B.A. from Cambridge. He was nearly denied his master's degree until advisors to Queen Elizabeth intervened, recommending he receive the degree, referring obliquely to his services for the state. His activities as a spy for Queen Elizabeth were later documented by historians. And while still in school, he wrote his play called Tamburlaine the Great, about a 14th century shepherd who became an emperor. The blank verse drama caught on with the public, and before his death, he wrote 5 more plays, including The Jew of Malta and Dr. Faustus, also published a translation of Ovid's Elegies. His former roommate and playwright Thomas Kidd was arrested and tortured for treason, and he told authorities that heretical papers found in his room belonged to Marlowe, who was subsequently arrested. And while out on bail, he became involved in a fight over a tavern bill and was stabbed to death on today's date, the 30th of May, in 1593. And that was playwright Christopher Marlowe. By proclamation of General John Logan of the Grand Army of the Republic, the first major Memorial Day observance is held to honor those who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion. Known to some as Decoration Day, mourners honored the Civil War dead by decorating their graves with flowers. On the first Decoration Day, on the 30th of May in 1868, General James Garfield made a speech at the Arlington National Cemetery, after which 5,000 participants helped to decorate the graves of more than 20,000 Civil War soldiers buried in that cemetery. The Civil War dead were honored on the first Memorial Day, which was then called Decoration Day, on today's date in 1868. By the late 19th century, many communities across the country had begun to celebrate Memorial Day, and after World War I, observers began to honor the dead of all of America's wars. Congress declared Memorial Day a national holiday to be celebrated the last Monday in May. And today, Memorial Day is celebrated at the Arlington National Cemetery with a ceremony in which a small American flag is placed on each grave. It is customary for the president or vice president to give a speech honoring the contributions of the dead and to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. More than 5,000 people attend the ceremony annually, and some southern states set aside a special day for honoring the Confederate dead, which is usually called Confederate Memorial Day. And on the 30th of May in 1911, Ray Harroun drives his single-seater Marmon Wasp to victory in the inaugural Indianapolis 500, now one of the world's most famous motor racing competitions. The Indiana automobile dealer Carl Fisher first proposed building a private auto testing facility in order to address car manufacturers' inability to test potential top speeds of new cars due to the poorly developed state of the public roadways. The result was the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, built on 328 acres of farmland 5 miles northwest of downtown Indianapolis. And the idea was that occasional races at the track would pit cars from different manufacturers against each other in order to showcase their full power and entice spectators to check out the new models themselves. And in 1911, on today's date, Fisher and his partners decided to focus on one long race per year as opposed to numerous shorter events in order to attract more publicity. And the purse for the grueling 500-mile race would be the richest in racing. So that day, 40 cars lined up at the starting line for the first Indy 500. A multi-car accident occurred 13 laps into the race, and the ensuing chaos temporarily disrupted scoring, throwing the finish into dispute when the eventual runner-up, Ralph Mulford, argued that he was the rightful winner. It was Ray Harroun, however, who took home the $14,250 purse, clocking an average speed of 74.59 miles per hour and a total time of 6 hours and 42 minutes. The Wasp was the first car with a rear view mirror. which he had installed in order to compensate for not having a mechanic in the seat next to him to warn of other cars passing. Impressive as it was his speed that would have finished him 10th in the 1922 Indy 500. Barely a decade later, nearly all the cars that started in the race were smaller, lighter, more efficient, and far more expensive than consumer cars. Their aerodynamic bodies featured narrow grilles and teardrop-shaped tails, knock-off wire wheels made for quick, efficient tire changes, and the new straight-sided tires lasted much longer than their early pneumatic counterparts. And the best cars were equipped with four-wheel hydraulic brakes and online 3.0-liter V8 engines made of aluminum. And by the mid-1920s, the Indy 500 had become what it is today, a high-paying event for the world's most expensive cars. But it was the first Indianapolis 500 that was held on today's date in the year 1911. And then in 1913, a peace treaty is signed ending the First Balkan War, in which the newly aligned Slavic nations of Serbia, Montenegro, Bulgaria, and Greece had driven Turkish forces out of Macedonia, a territory of the Ottoman Empire located in the tumultuous Balkans region of southeastern Europe. After rebellion in Macedonia, led by a secret society of nationalists known as the Young Turks, shook the stability of the Sultan's hold on Ottoman territory in Europe, the Austro-Hungarian Empire acted quickly to annex the dual Balkan provinces of Bosnia-Herzegovina and to encourage Bulgaria, also under Turkish rule, to proclaim its independence. Austria-Hungary's actions clearly upset the delicate balance of power in the Balkans, and the small, boisterous monarchy of Serbia was outraged by the annexation, having long regarded Bosnia-Herzegovina as part of its own rightful territory due to their shared South Slavic heritage. Meanwhile, Tsarist Russia, an important supporter of Serbia and the other great European power with influence in the Balkan regions, felt its own interest threatened by its rivals' actions. It was the first Balkan War that ended on today's date in 1913. And former President William Howard Taft dedicates the Lincoln Memorial on the Washington Mall on today's date in the year 1922. He was serving as Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and a crowd gathered on the mall to witness the ceremony. The neoclassical monument honors the 16th U.S. President Abraham Lincoln. Congress authorized construction of a monument to Lincoln on the Capitol grounds in 1867, 2 years after his assassination. But it took until 1911 for funding to be approved. Construction was then slowed due to World War I, and the monument's design by architect Henry Bacon was modeled after the Parthenon in Athens. Inside features a 19-foot-high white marble statue of a seated Lincoln by artist Daniel Chester French. An inscription above it reads, "In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever." Former President William Howard Taft dedicated the Lincoln Memorial on the Washington Mall on today's date, the 30th of May in 1922. And in 1942, Fred Korematsu is arrested in San Leandro, California for resisting internment under President Franklin Roosevelt's controversial Executive Order 9066, which called for the incarceration of nearly all Japanese Americans in the United States in the wake of Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. Following his conviction and incarceration in a Utah camp, he, who was then 23 years old, filed suit in federal court. His case eventually wound up before the U.S. Supreme Court, which in 1944 upheld the government's claim that the incarceration was a matter of military urgency. And in 1998, President Clinton awarded him, a staunch civil rights advocate, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. He died in 2005 at the age of 86. And on today's date, in 2011, California celebrated its first Fred Korematsu Day, the first day named after an Asian American in the United States. On the 30th of May in 1943, the extermination camp at Auschwitz in Poland receives a new doctor, 38-year-old Joseph Mengele, a man who will earn the nickname the Angel of Death. Upon arriving there and eager to advance his medical career by publishing groundbreaking work, he began experimenting on live Jewish prisoners. In the guise of medical treatment, he injected or ordered others to inject thousands of inmates with everything from petrol to chloroform. He also had a penchant for studying twins whom he used to dissect. He managed to escape imprisonment after the war, first by working as a farm stableman in Bavaria, and then by making his way to South America, became a citizen of Paraguay in 1959, and later moved to Brazil, where he met up with another former Nazi Party member, Wolfgang Gerhardt. And in 1985, a multinational team of forensic experts traveled to Brazil in search of this angel of death. They determined that a man named Gerhard, but believed to be Mengele, had died of a stroke while swimming in 1979. Dental records later confirmed that he had, at some point, assumed Gerhard's identity and was in fact the stroke victim. A fictional account of Joseph Mengele's life after the war was depicted in the film called Boys from Brazil, with Mengele portrayed by Gregory Peck. But it was on today's date in 1943 when he entered Auschwitz as a new doctor who was later called the Angel of Death. After suffering through years of suppression under Nigeria's military government, the breakaway state of Biafra proclaims its independence from Nigeria. Nigeria had gained independence from Britain in 1960. 6 years later, the Muslim Haussas in northern Nigeria began massacring the Christian Igbos in the region, prompting tens of thousands of Igbos to flee to the east, where their people were the dominant ethnic group, and they doubted that Nigeria's oppressive military government would allow them to develop or even survive. So on the 30th of May, today's date, in 1967, a lieutenant colonel there and other non-Igbo representatives of the area established the Republic of Biafra, comprising several states of Nigeria. After diplomatic efforts by Nigeria failed to reunite the country, war between Nigeria and Biafra broke out in 1967 itself. And the forces made some initial advances, but Nigeria's superior military strength gradually reduced Biafran territory. The state lost its oil fields, its main source of revenue, and without the funds to import food, an estimated million of its civilians died as a result of severe malnutrition. Nigerian forces captured the provincial capital, one of the latest Biafran strongholds, and they were forced to flee to the Ivory Coast. 4 days later, Biafra surrendered to Nigeria. And then on the 30th of May in 1967, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Años de Soledad, or 100 Years of Solitude, is first published. The book, often referred to as a defining work of Latin American literature, made Marquez a prime candidate for the Nobel Prize in Literature, which he was awarded in 1982. 100 Years of Solitude follows 7 generations of the Buenda family, fictional founders of the fictional town of Macondo in Marquez's native Colombia. The town and the family remain isolated from the outside world for much of the novel, but new technologies, political upheavals, and foreign businesses encroach upon them and shape the narrative. Some events in the novel, such as the Thousand Days' War, really happened, while others, such as the massacre of striking workers, were based on true moments in Colombian history. And one of the novel's defining features, however, is Marquez's magical realism. Bizarre things happen frequently and are treated by the author and his characters as if they are completely ordinary. And the novel was an immediate and enduring success, and many critics saw the emergence of a distinctively Latin American style of Marquez's fatalism and cynical view of history. His work drew comparisons to that of William Faulkner and Vladimir Nabokov, while Chilean poet Pablo Neruda called it the greatest revelation in the Spanish language since Don Quixote. As he accepted his Nobel Prize, Marquez eloquently explained what magical realism meant to him. I dare to think that it is this outsized reality, and not just its literary expression, that has deserved the attention of the Swedish Academy of Letters, he said. A reality not of paper, but one that lives within us, full of sorrow and beauty, of which this roving and nostalgic Colombian is but one cipher more. 100 Years of Solitude, published on today's date in 1967, and got the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1982. The U.S. unmanned space probe Mariner 9 is launched on a mission to gather scientific information on Mars, the fourth planet from the Sun. The 1,116-pound spacecraft entered the planet's orbit in 1971 in November and circled Mars twice each day for almost a year, photographing the surface and analyzing the atmosphere with infrared and ultraviolet instruments. It gathered data on the atmospheric composition, density, pressure, and temperature of Mars, and also information about the surface composition, temperature, and topography of that planet. And when Mariner 9 first arrived, Mars was almost totally obscured by dust storms, which persisted for a month. However, after the dust cleared, Mariner 9 proceeded to reveal a very different planet, one that boasted enormous volcanoes and a gigantic canyon stretching 3,000 miles across its surface. The spacecraft's cameras also recorded what appeared to be dried riverbeds, suggesting the ancient presence of water and perhaps life on the planet. The first spacecraft to orbit a planet other than Earth, Mariner 9, sent back more than 7,000 pictures of the red planet and succeeded in photographing the entire planet. Mariner 9 also sent back the first close-up images of the Martian moon. Its transmission ended in 1972. But this unmanned space probe, Mariner 9, was launched on this mission to gather scientific information on Mars on today's date in 1971. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev arrives in Washington, D.C. for 3 days of talks with President George Bush. And this summit meeting centered on the issue of Germany and its place in a changing Europe. When he arrived for this second summit meeting with President Bush, his situation in the Soviet Union was perilous. The Soviet economy, despite his many attempts at reform, was rapidly reaching a crisis point, and Russia's control over its satellites in Eastern Europe was quickly eroding, and even Soviet republics such as Lithuania were pursuing paths of independence. Some U.S. observers believe that in an effort to save his struggling regime, Gorbachev might try to curry favor with hardline elements in the Russian Communist Party. That prediction seemed to be born out of his behavior on that summit on today's date in 1990. And the main issue at the summit, though, was Germany. The Gorbachev-Bush summit ended after 3 days with no clear agreement on the future of Germany. Russia's pressing economic needs, however, soon led to a breakthrough. And in July of 1990, Bush promised Gorbachev a large economic aid package and vowed that the German army would remain relatively small. The Soviet leader dropped his opposition to German membership in NATO. And in October of 1990, East and West Germany formally reunified and shortly thereafter joined NATO. But it was the Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, who arrived in Washington, D.C. for 3 days of talks with President George Bush for this summit meeting centered on the issue of Germany and its place in a changing Europe on today's date, the 30th of May in the year 1990. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was some stories from the annals of history that happened on today's date. Wishing you all a lovely 30th of May and a beautiful Thursday here today as I end my show for today. For those of you who'd like to reach me directly, my number is 214-675-1754.